Jacob Fatu decides to form his own faction against Solo Sikoa backstage at SummerSlam. Tensions explode backstage at SummerSlam. Jacob Fatu breaks away from the bloodline. Just when you thought the bloodline drama couldn't go any deeper, Jacob Fatu makes a shocking move backstage at WWE SummerSlam that could change everything. In this intense behind-the-scenes moment, Jacob Fatu finally reaches his breaking point and declares war on Solo Sikoa. With chaos brewing within the bloodline, Jacob decides it's time to step out of the shadows and lead his own path. Is a new faction forming? What does this mean for Roman Reigns, Paul Heyman, and the future of WWE? Tensions backstage at WWE SummerSlam had already reached a fever pitch long before the first bell rang. Whispers moved like wildfire through the hallways of the arena. Something was coming, something nobody expected. And at the center of it all was Jacob Fatu, a man once heralded as the enforcer of the bloodline, now pacing like a caged animal outside his locker room. What happened next would not only rock the very foundation of the bloodline, but shift the balance of power across the entire WWE landscape. Because on this night, Jacob Fatu didn't just question loyalty, he shattered it. The camera crews missed it, but the eyes of the locker room didn't. Minutes after Solo Sikoa's brutal, unsanctioned assault on an already injured Jey Uso backstage, Jacob Fatu was seen storming through the corridor, his face a storm of fury, his chest heaving like a war drum. He had stayed silent long enough. The plan had gone too far. And now he was done. As the bloodline saga had twisted and turned over the past year, Jacob Fatu had always been the wild card. Unapologetically vicious in the ring, yet dangerously quiet behind the scenes. He didn't speak often, but when he did, everyone listened. And tonight, after months of watching Solo tear the family apart from the inside out, manipulating fear, exerting dominance, and betraying brothers, Jacob Fatu finally made a choice. He would no longer fight for the bloodline. He would fight against it. It started with a confrontation no one saw coming. Roman Reigns wasn't in the building. Paul Heyman was. And he stood wide-eyed and speechless as Jacob approached him in the hallway, locking eyes with the man many believed still pulled the strings. "You let this happen," Jacob growled, pointing a thick finger toward the blood-stained floor where Jey Uso had been left battered just an hour before. Heyman tried to speak, tried to explain that Solo was only trying to protect the family legacy. But Jacob cut him off cold. "This isn't family anymore. This is tyranny. And I won't be part of it." Heyman's jaw dropped. For the first time in years, the wise man had no words. Jacob Fatu then did something few in the bloodline had ever done. He turned his back and walked away, not just from Heyman, not just from Solo, but from everything the Anoa'i legacy had become under this reign of silent fear. And as he disappeared into the loading dock tunnel of the arena, his phone was already ringing. Not with regret, but with purpose. Sources backstage have confirmed that just minutes later, Jacob was seen on a private call with Zilla Fatu, his younger cousin and the son of the late Imaga. For months, Zilla had been kept at arm's length, allegedly not ready for the big stage, but insiders now claim that was Solo's doing, keeping threats far from his kingdom. But Jacob? He saw the future. And he was ready to build it, with or without WWE's permission. The bloodline, as it stood, was fracturing beyond repair. And for Jacob Fatu, the time had come to rewrite the story from the ground up. No more playing backup. No more waiting for Roman's return. No more following orders from a cousin who would sacrifice kin for control. Jacob wasn't alone for long. Later that night, after the main event, a bout in which Solo Sikoa retained the Intercontinental Championship under controversial circumstances, Jacob Fatu was spotted in the underground parking structure, talking to another familiar face, Tama Tonga. A man once fiercely loyal to the family name, but like Jacob, recently disillusioned by the warpath Solo had taken. The two shared no hug, no smile, just a nod. A warrior's agreement. An alliance that needed no words. Tama didn't need convincing. He'd seen enough, heard enough, to know that Jacob was serious. That this wasn't just rebellion. This was revolution. And it wasn't just about Solo anymore. It was about taking the entire structure of the bloodline and burning it to the ground. Inside the building, chaos erupted as news began to circulate among the locker room. Some stars looked on in disbelief, others in relief. The grip the bloodline had held over Raw and SmackDown was finally showing cracks. And for those who had been bullied, sidelined, or broken by Solo's unchecked violence, Jacob's rebellion was a spark of hope. Meanwhile, Solo Sikoa had yet to realize what was happening. Backstage, he was still gloating over his victory, surrounded by the hollow echoes of respect from lower-tier talent too afraid to challenge him. But his smirk faded the moment Heyman approached him, face pale, lips trembling. "We have a problem," he whispered. Solo rolled his eyes. "What now?" "Jacob's gone," Heyman replied. "And he's not coming back." For a man who had believed he could control everything, Solo Sikoa stood still for a long moment. Until he threw a chair across the room in a fit of rage. That was the moment it became real. Jacob Fatu wasn't running. He was regrouping, rebuilding, reclaiming what had been lost, and word quickly began spreading to other disenfranchised stars across the roster. Names like Fatu, even older legends like Rikishi, began popping up in speculative threads online. Was this the beginning of a new faction? One not bound by fear, but by truth? One that wasn't about who ruled, but who protected the legacy. In the days following SummerSlam, WWE went into crisis mode. PR teams scrambled to contain the fallout, unsure whether the schism was part of the plan or something far more dangerous. WWE's creative heads reportedly held emergency meetings as Jacob Fatu's walkout began trending globally under the hashtag #FatuFaction. And still, Jacob remained silent. But silence, in this case, spoke volumes. He didn't need to tweet. He didn't need to speak on camera. His actions backstage at SummerSlam were louder than any promo. Louder than any spear or Samoan spike. This wasn't about betrayal. This was about survival, because for far too long, Jacob had been the muscle, the enforcer, the silence between screams. Now, he was the voice. And that voice was ready to rally an army. Jacob's vision wasn't built on fear. It was built on protection, loyalty, brotherhood. Not the kind that demands obedience, but the kind that earns it. And in a company ruled by narratives and titles, Jacob Fatu was now writing one that no script could contain. SummerSlam may have delivered shocking results in the ring, but its most seismic moment came behind the curtains, away from the spotlight. In the shadows where real change begins, Jacob Fatu didn't ask for permission. He took the first step toward a war that would redefine what the bloodline meant forever, and as Solo Sikoa sat fuming in his locker room, fists clenched and eyes bloodshot, he finally understood. The war was no longer about Roman Reigns. It wasn't about who was left in charge. It was about who dared to stand up. When everyone else bowed down, Jacob Fatu had dared, and now WWE had a storm coming. In the 24 hours that followed Jacob Fatu's dramatic departure from the bloodline backstage at SummerSlam, the WWE universe was consumed by speculation. Fans flooded social media with theories, and even the most reliable wrestling journalists admitted they were caught off guard. The company remained eerily quiet, issuing no official statement. But behind closed doors, WWE executives were scrambling. This wasn't just a character shift. This was a full-on mutiny within one of the most dominant factions in professional wrestling history. And it was spearheaded by a man no one expected to step out of the shadows. Jacob Fatu had always been a soldier, a silent executioner for the family cause. His arrival in WWE was originally orchestrated with one purpose in mind: protect Solo Sikoa's reign while Roman Reigns was away. But somewhere along the way, Jacob realized he wasn't protecting a kingdom. He was enforcing a dictatorship. And that realization cracked something deep inside him. By Monday morning, Jacob was already in Orlando. But not to visit the WWE Performance Center. He was meeting with three men, two former NXT powerhouses recently released, and one familiar face from NJPW who had quietly arrived on U.S. soil just days before. While their names remain unconfirmed, insiders say this meeting wasn't casual. This was a recruitment session. A war council. Jacob wasn't just walking away from the bloodline. He was building a rival faction to replace it. Back in Stamford, WWE officials debated how to handle the situation. Should they try to coax Jacob back into the fold with creative control and main event status? Or were they witnessing the rise of a new faction they couldn't stop, even if they tried? Vince McMahon might have been gone, but the sense of unease in the building felt eerily similar to the chaos that had erupted during the original NWO Invasion era. Meanwhile, Solo Sikoa's reaction to the news was anything but calculated. Sources from SmackDown's Friday taping reveal that Solo arrived at the venue 2 hours late and refused to speak to anyone but Heyman. He reportedly destroyed a locker backstage and screamed at one of the lighting crew members who accidentally walked past him. He's paranoid, one anonymous wrestler revealed. He knows Jacob was the only one keeping the locker room from turning on him. Now that Jacob's gone, he's a marked man. Paul Heyman, usually the mastermind behind faction stability, looked defeated. He had been the architect of the bloodline's power, and now that very structure was falling to ash. Roman Reigns hadn't returned his calls. Jimmy USO was off TV recovering from storyline injuries. And Jay? Still recovering from Solo's real-life beatdown that may have crossed more than a few backstage lines. There was no one left to shield Solo, and Jacob knew it. That Friday night on SmackDown, WWE producers played a pre-recorded promo Solo had shot days earlier. In it, he boasted about the bloodline's legacy, mocked Roman's absence, and declared himself the true tribal chief. The crowd reaction was mixed. Not because of heat, but because everyone now knew the truth. Solo wasn't the leader. He was the problem. And Jacob Fatu wasn't gone. He was just getting started. Backstage, the tension was suffocating. Then, everything changed. As the main event match between Cody Rhodes and LA Knight played out in the ring, a commotion broke out in the backstage area. Security scrambled. Cameras were cut. But one blurry phone video made it out, leaked by a staffer and uploaded to Twitter within minutes. The footage showed Jacob Fatu, flanked by two masked men in black hoodies, walking through the SmackDown backstage lot. One man appeared to be Zilla Fatu. The other? Possibly Hikuleo, though this remains unconfirmed. They didn't speak. They didn't cause chaos. They just walked right through the heart of the arena. Before disappearing into the loading dock without a word, the caption on the viral post was simple: "He's not hiding anymore." Within the hour, the video had millions of views. The message was clear: Jacob Fatu was declaring his presence. Not as a rogue cousin, but as a leader of a new force in WWE. The company didn't issue a statement, but Paul Heyman reportedly demanded a private meeting with Triple H the next morning. The bloodline wasn't just fracturing. It was dissolving. That night, WWE stars and catering couldn't stop talking. Some said they'd seen Jacob in the parking lot. Others claimed he'd been approached by Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens days earlier. Whether true or not, one thing was undeniable: the locker room's fear of the bloodline was gone. Jacob's rebellion had emboldened others. Superstars who had once stayed silent now whispered in hallways. And Solo? He was alone, drowning in a power he could no longer hold. The heart of this seismic shift was a deeper question. Where was Roman Reigns, the tribal chief? The foundation upon which the bloodline was built remained missing. No tweets, no texts, no appearances. Some insiders claimed he was watching closely, choosing not to interfere yet. Others believed he was furious, feeling betrayed by both Jacob and Solo for taking the family legacy and turning it into civil war. But one man close to Roman hinted otherwise. A former producer who worked closely with Reigns during the early days of the bloodline told our sources, Roman always said if the family broke itself apart, he wouldn't stop it. He'd let the real leaders rise. Jacob Fatu was rising, and that terrified everyone. Meanwhile, rumors swirled that WWE was planning a surprise faction debut at the upcoming Raw or SmackDown. Speculation suggested that Jacob and his new group could hijack a segment, cut a live promo, or even attack Solo mid-match. Nothing was confirmed. And yet, Everyone knew something was coming, and the WWE Universe? They were eating it up. Hashtag Fatu faction trended for the second straight day. Fans created custom graphics of Jacob leading a new version of the bloodline. Fantasy bookings ran wild. Some suggested a War Games match at Survivor Series, Solo's faction versus Jacob's uprising. Others envisioned Roman returning, not to lead, but to destroy both sides and start over. But amid the chaos, Jacob remained as silent as ever. No interviews. No press. No social media, just actions, and that's what made him dangerous. The power of the bloodline was never in its numbers. It was in its fear. And Jacob Fatu had stripped that away. He had exposed the core rot inside the empire, where power had replaced purpose and dominance had replaced family. Now, WWE stood at a crossroads. Solo Sikoa had the titles, the TV time, and the chaos. But Jacob Fatu had something far more dangerous. Loyalty, not forced. Not manipulated, earned, and that loyalty was spreading across Raw, across SmackDown, across NXT. As SummerSlam weekend came to a close, a new narrative had taken root. The fall of the bloodline wasn't just a chapter in WWE history, it was the beginning of a war, and the man leading that charge, he wasn't wearing a crown. He wasn't carrying a title. He didn't need to. He had the truth. And the truth was about to burn everything down. By the time Monday Night Raw aired just 2 days after SummerSlam, the entire WWE locker room was on edge. The atmosphere backstage didn't feel like a typical post-pay-per-view fallout. It felt like a battlefield before the first shot is fired. The entire production crew had been placed on high alert. Security was doubled. Camera operators were given specific instructions to avoid unscheduled backstage areas. Talent agents whispered warnings to superstars before they walked through the curtain. Because everyone, from the rookies to the veterans, knew one thing: Jacob Fatu was going to make a move, and it wasn't a matter of if, it was when. Raw began like any other episode: pyro, music, and a packed house full of anticipation. But something felt off. The commentary team kept their tone tight, cautious, carefully skirting around the recent incident at SummerSlam. There were no official mentions of Jacob Fatu's walkout. No acknowledgement of his presence backstage. Just a sense of growing unease that hung in the air like a storm cloud, until the third segment, Solo Sikoa entered the ring for what was advertised as a tribal address. The crowd immediately erupted in boos, but Solo stood unfazed, flanked only by a pair of anonymous security guards, not by Paul Heyman, not by any other bloodline member. He wore no smile. Only contempt. He began by mocking Roman Reigns' silence. Declared that the true leader wasn't the one who hid when things got hard, it was the one who stayed, who bled, who conquered. "I am the head of the table now," Solo growled. "And anyone who doesn't fall in line gets buried." The audience jeered, some fans even chanting "Fatu. Fatu" in defiance. Solo's jaw clenched at the sound. He knew who they wanted. But he wasn't about to give them what they came for. Or so he thought. As the crowd continued to taunt him, the Jumbotron suddenly flickered, glitching into static. The arena lights dimmed. Commentary went silent. The air shifted, then came the footage. A shaky, black and white video feed appeared. It was pre-recorded, shot in an undisclosed location. And at the center of the frame, Jacob Fatu. He stood against a graffiti-covered wall in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Hooded figures flanked him on either side. Shadows masked their faces, but their postures screamed danger. Jacob stepped forward slowly. Calm. Controlled. Like a man who'd already won. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. His voice was low and chilling. "You lost the family, Solo," Jacob said. "You poisoned it. You turned it into something it was never meant to be. You think fear makes you powerful? Nah, cuz fear makes you lonely. And you're already alone." The crowd inside the arena erupted. "While you've been playing God with a name you didn't earn. I've been watching, listening, building." Jacob glanced at the two men beside him, then back at the camera. "I didn't walk away from the bloodline," he said, leaning in. "I'm rebuilding it. Brick by brick. Soul by soul. And when I come back, I ain't coming alone." The video cut out. The arena exploded in noise. Shock. Anticipation. Inside the ring, Solo stood frozen. His rage wasn't masked this time. He threw the mic down, kicked the ropes, and screamed something inaudible at the production team. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not now. Not like this, but it had. Jacob Fatu had just made his intentions clearer than ever. He wasn't returning to WWE to fall back in line. He was returning to take over. Backstage, the reaction was immediate. Superstars gathered around monitors. Producers made panicked calls. Triple H was seen leaving gorilla position mid-segment. And Paul Heyman? Nowhere to be found. Some say he left the building the moment the video aired. Others say he watched it from Roman Reigns' private office, silently. Whatever the case, the chessboard had been flipped. Jacob Fatu's message sent ripples across the entire WWE ecosystem. NXT's Carmelo Hayes tweeted out a cryptic message just minutes after the promo aired. Finally. Real recognizes real. #FatuFaction. Moments later, Ricochet followed up with a tweet of his own. This might be the war we've been waiting for. But the most shocking response came from an unexpected source, Jey Uso, who, despite being pulled off WWE programming after Solo's brutal attack, posted a photo to his Instagram story. It was an old photo of him, Roman, Jimmy, and Jacob. No caption. Just the bloodline symbol and a red X over Solo's face. The message was loud and clear. Jey had chosen his side, and it wasn't with Solo. By the next morning, WWE officially changed Jacob Fatu's roster designation from Bloodline to unaffiliated. But internally, sources say the company was already reworking the creative plans for the next 6 months. Everything had changed. Jacob's new faction, still unnamed, wasn't just a wrinkle in the story. It was the story, and in true Jacob Fatu fashion, he still hadn't named his soldiers. Who were the masked men? Was Zilla Fatu officially involved? Was Hikuleo part of the rebellion? Had Jacob brought in talent from outside WWE to start a fire no one could contain? That uncertainty is what made this moment unlike anything the company had seen since the rise of the Shield. But this time, there were no justice.